Hello folks, I'm Trev Makes It Easy, the channel where we make learning easy. In this series, Trev on Econ, I'll be taking you through topics you're likely to run into in any introductory course in economics at the college or university level. My goal is to make economics less scary, more approachable, and, if I can, mildly enjoyable. With that being said, let's make it easy. All right, folks, let's get started. So today we're going to work on the supply shifts. Very similar to demand, there's going to be 5 events that are going to shift supply left and right, and our goal is to work through those today. Now, similar to what we saw with demand, we're going to have an overarching rule, okay? So the idea again is if an event makes us or allows us to produce/sell more, we're going to see supply shifts right, which again, that's going to be that increase for us, like we talked about in a video probably 1 or 2 ago. On the other hand, if an event makes us or we choose to produce or sell less, supply shifts left, which is a decrease. Again, these 2 rules are going to be our foundation. We're just going to provide some specific events that apply these in a realistic manner. So for this one, there's 5 as well. Okay. Number 1 is price of inputs. Number 2 is price of substitutes in production. Number 3 is technology. Number 4 is number of sellers. And number 5 is seller expectations of future price. Now, if you've watched the demand episode, you'll notice that some of these things kind of look like repeats, or at least similar to some degree. You have to remember in all of these, we've switched hats again. So we're no longer the buyer in these scenarios, we are the seller. So we have to take on a different perspective in terms of what we're trying to do. So we're going to do the same thing we did for demand. We're going to work our way through each of these and talk about how to deal with them. The nice thing with supply is 4 of them are fairly straightforward. It's the second one that's going to be a problem, right? So price of inputs. Right off the bat, we have to be careful. Inputs are just that, things that go into producing the good or service, right? Some common examples, the 2 biggest ones are raw materials and wages for labor. Okay. The raw materials that go into the good and service, oil, steel, copper, whatever, and the wages we pay our labor that makes the product, these are probably the 2 most common things we see change in test and quiz questions. All right. So again, the nice thing about this is that there's really only 2 scenarios. The first one is if the price of inputs goes down. So this could be something like, oh, they found a big mineral deposit and now copper is really cheap. Or there was a wage law change and all of a sudden we don't have to pay our workers as much money. Well, if that happens, that allows me to buy more resources. It allows me to hire more workers. And what that means is, guess what? Supply shifts right because I can produce more. I can make more. That is part of the benefit. Now, on the other hand, if the price of inputs goes up, maybe there's a new minimum wage law that makes it so people have to be paid more hourly, or maybe there's an oil shortage, meaning the price of oil has gone up. Well, all of a sudden, I can't buy as much oil or labor, and all of a sudden, I don't produce as much. So what that means is supply shifts left, right? Now, again, these correspond to the shifting left and shifting right pictures we saw in part 2 or 3. So make sure you go back and watch those videos if you're not too sure about what shifting left and shifting right look like. Number 2 is the tricky one, and it's tricky because I think people struggle to understand how the relationship works. So this is price of substitutes in production. So the idea here is that companies often will make more than one good, okay? I might make cars, but I also make buses and motorcycles and minivans. all right? And as the price of those changes, I'm going to supply more or less of each of them, okay? Now, big thing, when we say price, we mean what we are allowed to sell it for, i.e. selling price, okay? So something that people often mistake is they see that price went up, and you have to understand it's not the price to make the good, it's what I'm able to sell that good for. And the idea is if the price goes up, that thing becomes more profitable, okay? And likewise, when selling price goes down, good becomes less profitable. And our goal, I think it's obvious, is we want to supply more of the more profitable good. All right. So with these questions, we basically have to read them carefully and make sure that we are putting our effort and our resources into the thing that is more beneficial for us. So, for example, if the price of the substitute in production goes down, we want to make more of the main good. Okay. So this is kind of like related goods from demand. Again, if you haven't seen it, go back and watch it. But the idea here is I make vans and cars, and the price of vans has gone down, which means vans kind of suck now. They're not making me as much money. And if vans aren't making me money, I want to supply more of the main good, which I'm looking at here, which I think I said was motorcycles. So again, what do we see? Supply shifts right. However, if the price of the substitute in production goes up, so again, maybe the price of vans goes up, well, now all of a sudden, I want to put more of my resources into vans, which means I can't make as much of the main good, right? We want to make less of the main good. So again, we're always asking about the main good when we talk about shifting supply or demand left or right. So since I want to make less of the main good, what does that mean? Well, supply shifts left. I think this is one of the harder ones simply because it has the word substitutes in it. And in my experience, when people see the word substitutes, they automatically jump to the demand one, which was price of related goods, and they forget about this one completely. Okay? My general rule is if you see the word substitutes, that should set off a little red light in your head that says, hey, I need to read this carefully and ask myself, am I a buyer right now or am I a seller? Because it's going to behave in very different ways depending on which one I am. So again, number 2 is the hardest, but that means if you didn't find number 2 that hard, well, the rest are going to be really easy. So number 3 is technology. And there's effectively 2 things that can happen. You can get better technology or worse. Now, some teachers and books will only talk about getting better technology. So if we get better technology, obviously, hopefully, that means that supply shifts right. If I ask you to make a bunch of shirts for me and I give you a needle and thread, you're going to be able to make X number of shirts. But if I give you a sewing machine or a silk press or some sort of more advanced machinery, you're going to be able to make a lot more. And what's that going to do? It's going to increase our supply. However, it's often not thought about, but sometimes we run into situations where we get worse technology. Okay. A really common thing that I think people have experienced and don't realize that it connects to this is, have you ever worked a job where you do things a certain way? Let's say when you do your job, you go A, B, C, it's done. But then all of a sudden your boss comes along and says, no, we're not going to do that anymore. We're going to go A, B, E, C, D. Okay. They think that's going to revolutionize the process. You're going to be so much faster, but they don't really know the job. So you implement this quote unquote new technology that's supposed to make things better, but you find it's actually slowing you down a lot. You're doing a worse job. This is a case of a worse technology where you implement something assuming it's going to be good or hoping it's going to be good, and it ends up slowing things down drastically. So obviously, if better technology increased our supply, worse technology is going to decrease our supply. So we're going to see supply shifts left. All right. Again, some books and teachers don't even talk about this one, but I think it's common enough that it's worth discussing. Next up, number of sellers, and this one is just like number of buyers. Guess what? If you have more sellers, that just means there's more people making this product. And if there's more people making this product, supply shifts right. Okay? Yes, they're going to have to compete with each other, but assuming they're all at least trying to make stuff, that's going to make a difference. All right? And then we have, obviously, if you have less sellers, so maybe people have fallen out of this market, maybe no one wants to be in this market anymore, well, then all of a sudden the product is going to become more rare. So we're going to see it shift left. All right. Again, very similar to the number of buyers one from demand. So you can kind of link those two in your head to some degree. All right. And then finally, the last one, which is also a bit of overlap with demand, which is seller expectations of future price. Now, this one, again, you got to be aware, if you see expectations, am I a buyer or am I a seller? And based on which one you are is going to change the answer to this question. Because if the seller expects prices to fall, well, what's going to happen? Well, think about it. I own, let's say, a house, and I'm thinking of selling my house. But I think in a year's time, the market's going to crash. So what do? Do I want to sell it now while the price is high, or do I want to wait for the price to fall and then sell? Well, again, being rational people, I think most of us realize we want to sell now. And if we're selling now, what does that mean? Supply shifts right. Which means the opposite must be true if prices go up. All right. And again, put yourself in their shoe. If the seller expects prices to rise, I'm going to wait, right? If I think the market for my house is going to go up $100,000, I don't want to sell it now unless I really have to, right? I want to wait on it. I'm going to sell it later. And when I sell it later, what happens? Well, supply shifts left for now. For now, I'm not offering it to the market, which means no one's getting it, which means it's not for sale, which means overall, supply shifts left, right? Now, again, it's all fine and dandy to look at this, let me explain it to you, and go through it and say, oh yeah, that makes sense. Hopefully it does make sense. But I cannot stress enough for this lesson and the previous lesson how important practice is. All right. So whether your teacher provides questions or whether you have to hit up ChatGPT and say, hey, can you make me some supply shifting scenarios? Do what you have to do to start to get the feel for them. All right. It is not in your best interest to try and memorize all these outcomes. These outcomes are good for checking your work and making sure things make sense. But at the end of the day, there's thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of different scenarios you can run into. And you really want to know how to interpret them and critically think about them rather than just say, oh, this is a technology question. So, oh, Trevor said if it gets better, I shift right. You want to understand that connection. All right. So that wraps up our shifts for demand and supply. The next video is going to look at what happens if I now take my demand, I take my supply, and I overlap them. And this is the model that we've been building up to, which is our demand and supply model. I'll see you next time. Well, folks, that wraps up another lesson for today. I hope it was helpful. If you found the video valuable, please make sure to like and subscribe. And if you have any questions about the content or requests for other topics or subjects you'd like me to cover, please leave a comment below. Until next time, keep learning and make it easy.